Darshan, and today we are going to do the 12th chapter of your class 7 science book of NCERT. The name of the chapter is Reproduction in Plants. So students, you might already know that to produce its kind is a characteristic of all living organism. We have already learned this in class 6th. The production of new individuals from their parents is known as reproduction. But how do plants reproduce? There are different modes of reproduction in plants which we shall learn in this chapter. So, let us start by modes of reproduction. In class 6th, we have learnt about different parts of a flowering plant. Can you list the various parts of a plant and write the functions of each? Most plants have roots, stems and leaves. These are called the vegetative parts of a plant. After a certain period of growth, most plants bear flowers as well. You may have seen that the mango tree is flowering in spring. It is these flowers that give rise to juicy mango fruit we enjoy in summer. We eat the fruits and usually discard the seeds. Seeds germinate and form new plants. So, what is the function of flowers in plants? Flowers perform the function of reproduction in plants. Flowers are the reproductive parts. There are several ways by which plants produce their offspring. These are categorized into two types. First is asexual and second is sexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, plants can give rise to new plants without the help of seeds, whereas in sexual reproduction, new plants are obtained from seeds. So, asexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, new plants are obtained without production of seeds. And there is also a method of vegetative propagation. It is a type of asexual reproduction in which new plants are produced from their roots, stems, leaves and buds. Since reproduction is through the vegetative parts of the plant, it is known as vegetative propagation. Now to understand it better, let us do this activity. Activity 12.1. Cut a branch of rose or champa with a node. This piece of branch is termed a cutting. Now bury the cutting in the soil. A node is a part of the stem or branch at which a leaf arises. Water the cutting every day and observe its growth. Observe and record the number of days taken for roots to come out and new leaves to arise. So students, you must have seen flower buds developing into flowers. Apart from flower buds, there are buds in the axil. Now axil is the point of attachment of the leaf at the node. So apart from these flower buds, there are buds in the axil of leaves which develop into shoots. These buds are called vegetative buds. A bud consists of a short stem around which immature overlapping leaves are present. Vegetative buds can also give rise to new plants. Now let us move on to activity 12.2. For this activity, we will take a fresh potato. Observe the scars on it with the help of a magnifying glass. You may find buds in them. These scars are also called eyes. Now we will cut the potato into small proportions, each with an eye, and bury them in the soil. We will water the pieces regularly for a few days and observe their progress. Roots of some plants can also give rise to new plants. Sweet potato and dahlia are examples. Now, plants such as cacti produce new plants when their parts get detached from the main plant body. Each detached part can grow into a new plant. Interesting activity, students, isn't it? Now, plants produced by vegetative propagation take less time to grow and bear flowers and fruits earlier than those produced from seeds. The new plants are exact copy of the parent plants. As they are produced from a single parent, later in this chapter we will learn that plants produced by sexual reproduction have characters of both the parents, and plants produce seeds as a result of sexual reproduction. So, with this we are on to the topic of budding. So students, we have already learnt about the tiny organism like yeast which can be seen only under a microscope. These grow and multiply every few hours. if sufficient nutrients are made available to them. Now remember that yeast is a single-celled organism. Let us see how they reproduce. Activity 12.3. So we will take a piece of yeast cake or yeast powder from a bakery or a chemist shop. We will take a pinch of yeast and place it in a container with some water. Now we will add a spoonful of sugar and shake to dissolve it. We will keep it in the warm part of a room, and after an hour we will put a drop of this liquid on a glass slide and observe it under a microscope. We may see the formation of new yeast cell. The small bulb-like projections coming out from the yeast cell is called a bud. So, this bud gradually grows and gets detached from the parent cell and forms a new yeast cell. The new yeast cell grows, matures and produces more yeast cells. Sometimes another bud arises from the bud, forming a chain of buds. If this process continues, a large number of yeast cells are produced in a short time. Now, I am sure you might be able to understand budding. Let us move on to the topic of fragmentation. We might have seen slimy green patches in ponds or in other stagnant water bodies. These are the algae. When water and nutrients are available, algae grow and multiply rapidly by fragmentation. An alga breaks up into two or more fragments. These fragments or pieces grow into new individuals. This process continues and they cover a large area in a short period of time. So, with this we are on to the topic of spore formation. In the first chapter, students, we have learned that the fungi on a bread piece grows from spores which are present in the air. Now repeat activity 1.2 and observe the spores in the cotton-like mesh on the bread. When spores are released, they keep floating in the air as they are very light and they can cover long distances. Spores are asexual reproductive bodies. Each spore is covered by a hard protective coat to withstand unfavorable conditions such as high temperature and low humidity, so they can survive for a long time. Under favorable conditions, a spore germinates and develops into a new individual. Plants such as moss and ferns also reproduce by the means of spores. So students, now on to the topic of sexual reproduction. So, we have learned earlier the structure of a flower. We know that the flowers are the reproductive parts of the plant. Stamens are the male reproductive parts and pistil is the female reproductive parts. Now let us perform this activity 12.4. We will take a mustard or a china rose or a petunia flower and separate its reproductive parts, and then we will study various parts of a stamen and pistil. Flowers which contain either only pistil or only stamens are called unisexual flowers. Uni means one. And flowers which contain both stamens and pistil are called bisexual flowers, where bi means two. Now corn, papaya and cucumber produce unisexual flowers, whereas mustard, rose and petunia have bisexual flowers. Both male and female unisexual flowers may be present in the same part or in different plants. Now, try to identify the anther and filament of a stamen. So, anther contain pollen grains which produce male gametes. A pistil contains of stigma, style and ovary. Now, ovary contains one or more ovules. The female gamete or the egg is formed in an ovule. In sexual reproduction, a male and a female gamete fuse to form a zygote. With this, we are on to the topic of pollination. Generally, pollen grains have a tough protective coat which prevents them from drying up. Since pollen grains are light, they can be carried by wind or water. Insects visit flowers and carry away pollen on their bodies. Some of the pollen lands on the stigma of a flower of the same kind. The transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma of the flower is called pollination. If the pollen lands on the stigma of the same flower or another flower of the same plant, it is called self-pollination. Now, when the pollen of a flower lands on the stigma of a flower of a different plant of the same kind, it is called cross-pollination. So, now let us study about fertilization. The cell which results after fusion of the gametes is called a zygote. The process of fusion of male and female gametes to form a zygote is called fertilization. Then the zygote develops into an embryo. So, with this we are on to the topic of fruits and seed formation. We have learned about the fertilization. So, after fertilization, the ovary grows into a fruit and other parts of the flower fall off. The fruit is the ripened ovary. The seeds developed from the ovules. The seed contains an embryo enclosed in a protective seed coat. Some fruits are fleshy and juicy such as mango and orange. Some fruits are hard like almonds and walnuts. So, in nature, same kind of plants grow at different places. This happens because seeds are dispersed to different places. So, sometimes after a walk through a forest or a field or a park, we may find different types of seeds or fruits sticking to our clothes. So, students, try to observe how these seeds were clinging to our clothes. What do you think will happen if all the seeds of a plant were to fall at the same place and grow there? There would be severe competition for sunlight, water, minerals and space. As a result, the seeds would not grow into healthy plants. Therefore, plants benefit by seed dispersal. The topic of seed dispersal, it prevents the competition between the plants and its own seedlings for sunlight, water and minerals. It also enables the plants to invade new habitats for wider distribution. Seeds and fruits of plants are carried away by wind, water and animals. Winged seeds such as those of drumsticks and maple, light seeds of grasses or hairy seeds of ack and hairy fruit of sunflower gets blown off with the wind to far away places. Some seeds are dispersed by water. These fruits or seeds usually develop floating ability in the form of spongy or fibrous outer coat, for example like as in coconut. Some seeds are dispersed by animals, especially spiny seeds with hooks which get attached to the bodies of animals and are carried to distant places. Examples are like xanthium and urina. Now, some seeds are dispersed when the fruits burst with sudden jerks. The seeds are scattered far from the parent plant. This happens in the case of castor and balsam. So, students, with this we are on to the end of this chapter. And in this chapter we have explained and discussed reproduction in plants. So, let us summarize what we have studied in this chapter. So, we have studied that all organisms multiply or reproduce their own kind. In plants, there are two modes of reproduction, sexual and asexual. There are several methods of asexual reproduction such as fragmentation, budding, spore formation and vegetative propagation. The methods of sexual reproduction involves the fusion of male and female gametes. Now, we have also studied that in vegetative propagation, new plants are produced from different vegetative parts such as leaves, stems and roots. Then, we have learned that flower is the reproductive part of a plant. Flower may be unisexual with either the male or the female reproductive part. But we have also studied about the bisexual flower which has both the male and female reproductive part. The male gamete which are found inside the pollen grains, and there are also female gametes which are found into the ovule. Pollination is the process of transfer of pollen grains from the anther of one flower to the stigma of the same or another flower. Also, we have studied about the pollination, that it is of two types, self-pollination and cross-pollination. In self-pollination, pollen grains are transferred from the anther to the stigma of the same flower. In cross-pollination, pollen grains are transferred from the anther to one flower to the stigma of another flower of the same kind. Then we learned that pollination takes place in plants with the help of wind, water and insects. The fusion of male and female gametes is called fertilization. Also, we have learned that fertilized egg is called zygote. Zygote develops into an embryo. Then, Fruit is the mature ovary, whereas ovule develops into a seed which contains a developing embryo. Seed dispersal is aided by wind, water and animals. Also we have studied that seed dispersal helps the plant to first prevent overcrowding, second avoiding competition for sunlight, water, minerals and resources, third to invade new habitats. With the students, we are on to the exercise part of this chapter. So let us practice these exercises and make our knowledge more formidable. So students, now on to the first question of exercise part, which is fill in the blanks. A. Production of new individuals from the vegetative parts of parent is called vegetative reproduction. B. A flower may have either male or female reproductive parts. Such a flower is called unisexual flower. C. The transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same or of another flower of the same kind is known as pollination. D. The fusion of male and female gametes is termed as fertilization. And E. Seed dispersal takes place by means of wind, water and air. Now on to the second question, which is describe the different methods of asexual reproduction with examples. So students, different methods of asexual reproduction are A. Binary fission. This process takes place in unicellular organisms. Parent cell elongates and gets divided into two identical daughter cells. Each daughter cell grows into an independent adult. Then B. Endospore formation. In this method, the spore wall is formed around a bacterial cell to form an endospore. This endospore germinates to form an active bacterium under favorable conditions. C. Fragmentation. In this process, body of the organism breaks up into two parts. Then each part grows into a new filament, thus forming of two organisms takes place from a single one. D. Spore formation. The spores are tiny spherical unicellular structures protected by a thick wall. The spores are stored in a hard outer covering and this is called sporangium. Under favorable conditions, the hard cover breaks and spores spread for germination. Then E. Budding. In yeast, new organisms are produced by the bud formation from the parent organisms. After growing to full size, the bud gets detached and forms a new independent individual. And then F. Vegetative propagation. When vegetative parts of a plant like stems, leaves and root etc. give rise to new ones, it is called vegetative propagation. Now with this we are on to the third question. So the third question is, explain what you understand by sexual reproduction. To answer it student, sexual reproduction means involvement of two parents in the process of reproduction. It is found mainly in higher plants where male gamete and female gametes fuse to form a zygote. These zygotes develop into individuals which are not identical. Offsprings inherit the characteristics of both the parents. In sexual reproduction, both parents survive after the process of reproduction. Now students, it's time for fourth question, which is the difference between asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. So, in asexual reproduction, one parent plant is involved, but in sexual reproduction, both male and female parents are involved. In asexual reproduction, it occurs in unisexual plants, whereas sexual reproduction occurs in bisexual plants. Asexual reproduction occurs in lower plants, whereas sexual reproduction occurs in higher plants. In asexual reproduction, reproductive organs are not present, whereas in sexual reproduction, fully developed reproductive parts are present. In asexual reproduction, most of the methods the original parent disappears. In sexual reproduction, original parents remain alive after process of reproduction. In asexual reproduction, process like gamete formation or fertilization is not seen. In sexual reproduction, fertilization of gametes give rise to zygote. In asexual reproduction, characteristics of only one parent is inherited, whereas in sexual reproduction, characteristics of both parents are inherited. In asexual reproduction, no need of seeds is there, whereas in sexual reproduction, seeds are used to get new plants and form a flower. With the students, we are at the fifth question, which is to sketch the reproductive parts of a plant. So students, try to see different pictures of the reproductive parts of plants from your notebook, or you may also use internet. You may also take the help of your parents as well. Try to make sketches of parts containing anther, filament, stigma, style, ovule and ovary as well. Try to differentiate stamen and pistil, which are male and female reproductive parts of a plant respectively. So, moving on to the next question now, which is the difference between the self-pollination and cross-pollination. So, students, to answer it, in self-pollination, pollen grains are transferred to the stigma of the same flower. In cross-pollination, pollen grains are carried to stigma of another flower. In self-pollination, it occurs in bisexual plants having anther and stigma maturing at the same time. Whereas cross-pollination occurs in bisexual flowers having anther and stigma maturing at different times. In self-pollination, it takes place in plants like wheat, peas, etc. And cross-pollination takes place in plants like ladyfinger, tomato, brinjal, etc. With this, let us move on to the seventh question, students, which is how does the process of fertilization takes place in flowers? So, when the pollen grains reaches the stigma of a same species of flower, it starts growing out into the pollen tube of the stigma. This tube continues to grow inside the style till it reaches the ovule. Male cells are released into the ovule for the fertilization with the female egg cell, and thus the zygote is formed. After this process of fertilization, the ovary develops into fruit and ovule into seeds. So, let's move on to the eighth question now, which is describe the various ways by which seeds are dispersed. To answer this question, following are the ways in which seeds are dispersed. First, some light seeds like that of madar, which are hairy, dry and small, are carried away by the wind to different places. Second, spiny seeds and fruits like that of xanthium and urena stick to the clothes of passerby and animals. These seeds are carried away by these agents to different places. Third, in some plants like that of coconut, water acts as a dispersing agent. And fourth, some seeds are dispersed with the fruit burst like in the case of balsam and castor. So, on to the ninth question now. Ninth question says, match items in column 1 with those in column 2. So, students, in this question we have two columns. We have to match the following. In column 1 we have A, bud, which matches with yeast. B is eyes, which matches with potato. C is fragmentation, which happens in Spirogyra. D is wings, which happens in maple. And E is spores, which is related to bread mold. So now moving on to the 10th question. In this we have to tick the correct answer. So A, the reproductive part of a plant is first leaf, second stem, third root and fourth flower. The correct answer, student, is flower. B, the process of fusion of the male and the female gametes is called first fertilization, second pollination, third reproduction, fourth seed formation. The answer to this is fertilization. Now C, mature ovary forms the first seed, second stamen, third pistil, fourth fruit. The answer is fruit. D, a spore producing plant is first rose, second bread mold, third potato, fourth ginger? The answer is bread mold. E. Bryophyllum can be reproduced by its first stem, second leaves, third roots, fourth flower. The answer is leaves. So students, with this we are at the end of this chapter. We have learned various things in this chapter. We have summarized it as well, and also to make our knowledge more better and better, we have done the exercise part as well. I am sure you might have learned many interesting new things. So we will meet next time with some other interesting topics. Till then, I will take your leave. Bye bye.